Good evening and welcome to the It's All Greek to Me blog tour. I'm Dr. Paul Kiritsis and this is blog number 25. Today we're going to be talking about the cult of Hathor-Isis and the mother archetype. And in fact, this is a discussion which will extend into the next blog. The question which we'll be addressing is, the truant cult of the Egyptian Hathor-Nut-Isis is the longest lasting cult in the history of Western civilization. The cult had its beginning in the Predynastic Period of Egyptian history, so before 3100 BCE, and faded from collective consciousness in late antiquity. The Emperor Justinian brought about the cessation of more than 3,500 years of Great Mother worship in ancient Egypt by closing the last temple to the Isiac form of the Great Mother in Philae in 553 CE. Jungian phenomenology pertaining to the psychological archetype of the Great Mother Goddess is the medium best used to explicate why the original cult egregore remained prevalent in human consciousness for so long. Thus, the historical numinosity of the archetype is contextualized from a psychological perspective. Okay, let's start. The conscious origin of humanity has come far since the days of huts and bonfires, yet we remain closer to our rich animal instincts than what we perceive ourselves to be. Not very long ago, our ancient ancestors realized that the becoming of consciousness had been brought about by a very powerful force, one that had nothing to do with learning, but a reflection of innate knowledge through the exterior. This awakening or liberation might have occurred at the moment when he or she projected his or her budding consciousness onto a stone to sculpt the lovely face of the Hathor cow, thus bringing about the birth of the primordial mother goddess, the most influential archetype in the history of mankind. Oldest of the old, she is the goddess from whom all becoming arose. There in the beginning is mighty Hathor, mother of her father and daughter of her son. She appears as early as 3100 BCE on the Nama Palette, the oldest historical document known to man, denoting the passing of prehistoric to historic time. Here she is depicted in her theriomorphic form as a cow suckling the bull or infant king, which we can see on the first plate over here, and thus she is the epitome of divine motherhood. In time, she also comes to be represented as a slender woman with the head of a cow, so is it on plate 2 here, as a woman with cow ears, and as a woman crowned by a headdress of cow horns and a sun disk, which we can see in this picture, or in this plate here. As a manifestation of Hathor, Isis, whom we see here, shares the role of motherhood in matters of birth and rebirth with the former, though their purpose on a cosmic scale is vastly different. Hathor is the mother of the sun god Ra as the great wild bull, and Isis is the mother of Horus, son of Osiris, the earthly pharaoh. From the New Kingdom onwards, so 1550 to 1069 BCE, the two mother goddesses become so closely associated that they adopt the same iconography and come to be worshipped at each other's cult centers, dendera or tentira in Greek. And this is a picture of the temple of Hathor at Dendera, at the time that it was probably being excavated by, or found by Napoleon, refound, should I say, a bit buried, looks a bit buried here in sand. That would have been, I think, in about the 17th century. And the other cult center of the goddess in Egypt is Philae, which is Isis's cult center, which we can see here. And they're both in Upper Egypt. Their cosmic functions are so important that they come to enjoy state worship, and endless temples are erected in their honor. The message of salvation that the all-loving mother encompasses, coupled with the modification of her strictly Egyptian nature, due to Hellenization during the Ptolemaic era, is the key to her diffusion. She breaks down national barriers as characteristics of the goddess find their way into the art, architecture and traditions of foreign nations. It is by sea trade in the Mediterranean that her worship proliferates to places as far as Britain, Italy and Lebanon, where she comes to be known as Isis Myrionymus, which means she whose names cannot be numbered. There can be little doubt that the history of divine motherhood in Mediterranean civilization has its roots in the matriarchal stratum of ancient Egypt. The all-loving mother precedes the all-loving father and that is the archetype that refers to the unconscious origin from which all things arise. In addition, it is also the primal archetype of the collective unconscious, which results in the stagnation of Egyptian art and architecture for millennia. The primordial rank and status of the Great Mother is evident in pharaonic creation myth, which defines the beginning as having occurred at two places, human history and childhood. Naturally, the beginning, defined psychologically as the unconscious, denotes existence in a state of perfection. Paradise is a concept belonging strictly to this phase of conscious development, a phase which can only be described through the rich imagery of myth, as the ego can only grasp concepts as objects of consciousness. The Heliopolitan myth describes creation as having occurred when a mound of fertile silt rose out of the primordial waters of chaos. A blue lotus sprouted from the soil, and its petals opened to reveal the sun god Ra in the form of a child. The fertile soil is indeed the maternal Ouroboros, from which the embryo of ego consciousness sprouts in the form of the sun child, by which time and space differentiate from eternity in the form of light and bring forth the schism of opposites. The inference made here is that man is the bringer of light, and standing opposite him is woman, who dwells in the dark recesses of chaos. The structure of cult temples all over Egypt reflects this dogma, especially at Philae, where the temple of Isis stands on an island amidst the waters of the Nile. The Egyptian temple represents the fertile soil which rose from the primordial ocean, and the elevation between the entrance and the innermost shrine is symbolic of the mound of creation. The columns are papyriform and lotus-shaped, signifying the first plant life to appear, and the presence of a sacred lake is reminiscent of the waters of chaos. The sun, as creator god, is said to be Kefera, at the child at dawn, Ra the adult at midday, and Atum the elder at dusk. In the context of cosmic cycles of birth and rebirth, represented by the sun, the Uroboric Great Mother, as Hathor, gives birth to divinity in the form of the sun god Ra, whilst her manifestation as Isis gives birth to humanity in the form of the child god Horus. The analogy made between sun and representative of mankind, the pharaoh, expresses the desire for immortality through Uroboric autarky, or the afterlife. Traditionally, Ra and Atum are depicted anthropomorphically, whereas Kefera, the incarnation of infancy in mankind and childhood, is given the form of a scarab beetle. Through scrupulous observation that typified all early cultures, the Egyptians note that the scarab is the only creature that makes the motion of rolling, a perfectly moulded cylindrical sphere. As the symbol of perfection, and thus of the paradisal state of the embryo in the Ouroboros, the sphere becomes known throughout all Egypt as the place of becoming and transformation, and is in this form that Ra guards his secret name. This name is a word of power that caused the universe to come into being, and is known only by the womb that sheltered it, the Great Mother, Hathor of Dendera. The Great Mother Goddess is the centre of life's mystery, and like her maternal form, as Isis, is always depicted wearing black, as a reminder of her dwelling in the primordial waters of chaos. Translated directly, her name means House of Horus, and alludes to the celestial sky in which the solar Horus moves in the context of his divinity. From the matriarchal viewpoint, the sky is the place of the sun's birth and death. As the celestial cow, Hathor straddles it, and is identified with the four cardinal points and thus the four quarters of the world. According to Jung, a quaternary is the archetypal emblem for wholeness, and so by analogy, the Hathorian quaternary is the embodiment of the archetypal feminine, which I have attempted to draw here, or my depiction of what the archetypal feminine might look like when put on a diagram, obviously. The four-headed Hathor column used to decorate temples in all Egypt is an architectural representation of this concept, or at least I think it is. So here we go. That one here is a column from the Hathor temple. That's from Napoleon's book. The four functional spheres of Hathor's personality govern the stages by which the infantile ego conscious must ascend to reach spiritual transformation, or the stages by which it will be destroyed, depending on the level of psychic attraction at each of her poles. We have 4 poles, which we're going to be talking about. Oh, that's the wrong diagram. Okay, here we go. The divine cow of the east, represented by Isis. The wise cat of the north, represented by Bastet. The terrible lioness of the west, who brings forth death, represented by Sakhmet. And the eternal Cobra of the south, represented by Wadjet, I think. There we go.